I'm going to answer. Hello, everyone. We'll give just a few minutes for everyone to log in. All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. The Mental Health and Developmental Disabilities National Training Center is proud to have you here for our inaugural webinar titled Positive Identity Development, Identifying the Person, Not the Behavior, with featured presenter, Dr. Karyn Harvey.
Oops. Oh my goodness, it didn't switch. Guess what? It's not turning.
So Karyn, try clicking just on your slide.
Oh.
And then it kind of reactivate.
There we go. Sorry about that. Starting off with a bang.
Before we get started, we have some quick housekeeping items to go over. First, the controls we will be using through Zoom are the chat box and hand raising feature, both of which are at the bottom of your Zoom window. We will allot time for content-related questions at the end of the webinar, but if there is a problem during the presentation, such as a technology issue, feel free to type it into the chat box and we will do our best to address your concern. We will also be using the chat box periodically throughout this presentation, as we will ask the audience to respond to reflection questions. So please be aware that your answers will be seen by the team and potentially read out loud for discussion purposes. This webinar will be recorded and captioned after this live session and will be available for view on our website, mhddcenter.org. Lastly, we will be sending out a post-evaluation and post-test via email at the conclusion of this webinar. In order for CE credits and certificates to be distributed, individuals need to complete both assessments. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Dr. Karyn Harvey. Dr. Harvey is no stranger to the field of developmental disabilities, as she has over 25 years of experience serving individuals in the field in various capacities. Dr. Harvey has published many articles about therapeutic interventions for individuals with IDD, along with 2 books titled Positive Identity Development and Trauma-Informed Behavioral Interventions. Dr. Harvey is the Director of Training and Program Development at the Park Avenue Group where she consults and trains various health professionals on trauma-informed care. Please visit her website, karynharvey.org, for more information. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Harvey.
Thank you so much. I am so honored to be the first presenter in this really important webinar series. I really am so excited about that, and I'm really excited about MHDD and all the really great work that you all do. So first of all, I want to thank MHDD and the lovely people here that have been helping me so much every step of the way, and for this opportunity. And next, I want to thank all of you. It means so much to me to be able to interact with people who have chosen this work as their life's mission, or maybe their, portion of life's mission. I don't want anyone to feel too much pressure, but that's so great. I feel so deeply that folks with disabilities are so marginalized, intellectual disabilities in particular, are so marginalized in our society and so ignored, and we do a little bit for kids, never enough. And then adults in so many cases are just kind of not really cared for in ways that we need to, except for the small group of people who are so dedicated and understand that people are adults a lot longer than they are children. And adult development is just as important. So I just want to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart, working with children and adults with intellectual disabilities and taking your time to listen today. Thank you so much. We're going to look at the strengths-based approach. I wrote a book called Positive Identity Development. It was my first book, and I think only 4 people read it because I made them read it. Even my own family didn't read it. They just said they did. But, what are you going to do? And my interns and my staff had to read it. But I was so happy when the MHDD folks said, no, this is what we'd love for you to talk about, because I usually talk about trauma. But I strongly believe that we have to also look at development, and we have to understand folks in the context of their whole entire developmental trajectory. What have they been through in life? What has been their journey? What is there for them, and what awaits them? So if we look at the whole lifespan of development, I think it's a really important perspective, and I think it enables us to support folks in different ways, rather than just focusing on their behavior, focus on their growth, their development, and largely in that context, their identity. I really believe that it's so important for folks to have a strong sense of self. And I'm going to talk a lot about that today, and why it's needed and what is needed. And we have to really look at how can we support folks. I have a website in which there are some tools there, pid.thenadd.org. They have free tools, lots of workbooks that can be used there. So we can offer that as well today. Okay, so now I like to talk about Erik Erikson, who was a wonderful, wonderful psychosocial theorist. So he was actually mentored by Freud, but went way past Freud, who said, yeah, all the stages of development are psychosexual, right? Well, maybe he had a little bit of a hang up. I don't know. I don't mean to, put Freud down, but it was a little overly focused on the sex part. We learned so much from him, but what Erikson said was, wait a minute, having stages of development are very clear and very important. And in each stage of development, there is a conflict to resolve. But what's most important is that it's a psychosocial conflict. And that in order to have correct and really effective adult development, you have to go through each period and you have to resolve the conflict. So let's take a minute and look at those sections, those phases of development. So interestingly, the first phase he called trust versus mistrust. And he says, a baby is born, and within days, minutes really, right? But weeks and days and weeks, they figure out whether or not the world is a safe place. And I am so fascinated by the fact that he set that stage for what we now actually have as the attachment area of psychology, right? So he was the first attachment theorist, really, because what he talks about is trust versus mistrust, which is the core of attachment theory. And I think that's so important. And it's important for us to look at in the context of the individuals that we support. So we'll be focusing on that. Then he looked at autonomy versus shame. Let's talk about folks with intellectual disabilities. And that's what I really focus on, is intellectual disabilities. So as that child develops, they get to 1.5, you know, as it becomes clear that that child may not be developing in the normal milestones, and a child who is developing hits certain, you know, periods where mom or the caregiver, dad, back off. When you're seeing that there's an issue, often all of our tendencies as parents is to zoom in. No, I've got to help you. So it's hard to develop that autonomy. That's your next struggle in your next phase of development. Initiative versus guilt. Okay, Erickson said it's so important to learn to take initiative. But when you're not sure and you're not catching up with everybody and you're not understanding things, it's very difficult to take initiative. And it's very difficult to be getting the signs that it's okay from your environment when you're actually maybe getting lots of therapies or getting the supports that you need. So that's a difficult conflict to resolve, to get to initiative. It's hard to get to autonomy. It's hard to get to initiative. Industry versus inferiority. Okay, when you're labeled as having an intellectual disability, right there, if you're put in a special class or you're pulled aside, you're getting the supports you need, but you're also getting a message. Okay, you're not quite where everyone else is. And that can be devastating in a psychosocial context. Now, what I really like to focus on is this adolescent stage of ego identity versus role confusion, because that's the point where people have to develop a sense of self, right? Where if you think about your own life, and we'll talk about this a little later, you're figuring out who you are, maybe setting your dreams and ideals and goals based on your own sense of your strengths and trying to figure out, am I this, am I that? And at that time, it's very hard for a person with an intellectual disability, because at that same time, they're finding out what they're not. And we'll talk more about that, but what a critical role. Then we go on to intimacy versus isolation. Well, I believe that isolation is one of the most horrible issues in our field, that people are so lonely who have intellectual disabilities, and that loneliness is pervasive. And so few people that I know have been able to get married or have significant others that they live with and haven't been able to move on. He goes on to generativity versus stagnation. You know, when you're generating and you're helping the next generation, again, a real difficulty when you've already been put in that category of someone who, quote unquote, needs help rather than is the one helping others. And finally, ego integrity versus despair. That's what I'm working on. So that's where we old people try to fit. Well, I'm not quite that old. All right, I just saw the number. Okay, I'm not quite there, but I feel like I am some days. But where we say, okay, was my life worth something? And then so many folks that, you know, I support are just fighting so hard not to have to go to the day program every day and to be able to retire, let alone thinking about what has my life been and what has my contribution been. So when we look at this psychosexual lifespan picture, we have to think, okay, how are folks with intellectual disabilities resolving the conflict at each stage? And where are those snags? And how can we support? I think that is a wonderful approach that might help us to really support in effective ways, right? So when we look at back to that first stage, right? Let's talk about trust versus mistrust. Let's talk about a baby who's born and you know, trying to figure out, is this a safe world? And the baby's hungry and the baby cries. And hopefully when the baby cries, somebody comes and comforts that baby and feeds that baby. But how about if, you know, mom is downstairs drinking that Jack and watching The Young and Restless and having a good time, and baby has to scream, and mom is like, Victor, why'd you do that? And baby has to scream so loudly until mom hears the baby and comes and takes care of that baby. Well, that baby learns you have to scream to get attention. You have to be in people's face. Or maybe grandma's watching baby, and really somebody should be watching grandma. This happens a lot. And grandma's sleeping every day, and baby has to scream loud enough to wake up grandma. Wake up, grandma, you're not in heaven yet. Come feed me. And whatever, right? Or maybe baby's in a situation where mom might be having a drug problem, using opioids, doing something, and mom's not responding at all. And when baby screams, nobody comes. And baby learns it doesn't matter what you do. And that avoidant attachment, insecure attachment, it occurs when it's on and off. An avoidant attachment happens when there's no one to connect with. And when you get fed, when you get helped, are all just random, not based on your ability to call out for help. Nathan Fox talks about the serve and return relationship being so important in these early phases in life. And if that's not there, these attachment issues come up. So, of course, the reactive attachment disorder is something we see folks often diagnosed with. And there are combinations of all kinds of patterns, can be some insecure, some avoidant, whatever. But it's all about not having your needs met at those critical periods. I have worked with a number of folks who were born to somebody who had a drug problem, and sometimes they were born with drug exposure. Sometimes it was a combination of drug and alcohol exposure, and there's certain specific biological damage that comes along with that. But also, usually there's a caregiver that's not as responsive as could be possible. And oftentimes they're treating their own trauma, and we have generational trauma, and we have all kinds of things going on. But what happens is that attachment is not secure. And that's the devastating piece. And that happens a lot with the folks that are born with that in utero exposure to toxins such as drugs or alcohol. And then maybe they're adopted. I've worked with a number of folks who've been adopted, but then there's all these issues that can't be resolved. Well, that's because that trust versus mistrust was never established. They can't trust. That attachment wasn't there. And that's sadly a lot of the people we support. Good news is we have a beautiful thing called neuroplasticity, right? Where our brain can reform and we can eventually learn to connect, learn to trust, but it often takes years. And I bet many of you have had the experience of being with someone where you're trying over and over again to connect with them and they're not trusting you and they're not connecting. And finally they start to trust. And it's amazing how just that one trusting relationship can cause that person to totally open up and blossom in every aspect of their life. I've seen it so many times. I've seen it with great staff who are amazing and who never give up. And, that's something that, has happened many times, but it takes perseverance, it takes patience. And we have to understand it's not personal when someone isn't connecting with us or when they're angry with us or whatever. It's such a reflection of the whole trajectory of their development. People carry with them all the things that happened. And here we are, now in the present with them, dealing not only with them in that present, but their whole past and their whole history. So do you know someone, can you think of someone that you work with who's constantly needing you? I need you, I need you, I need to talk to you right now. I need you, I need you, I need you. I mean, that's been the theme of my life. I probably have somebody calling me right now. I'm looking at my phone. I shouldn't look at my phone. Oh my gosh, somebody did just call me because I have weak moments and I give everyone my cell phone. But I have to talk to you. I have to talk to you right now, right? Chances are that attachment was insecure. Somewhere early on, they learned the world isn't a safe place unless you just jump up and down, scream, and tell people you need them. These patterns were set up early on, and it's very difficult. So I worked with this one young woman, and her need was constant. And sure enough, she had alcohol exposure and possible drug exposure in utero and was born to somebody who was really struggling with addictions issues. And then she was, after several, I guess it was after about 2 months, she was adopted, put with a family, a wonderful, caring family, but was constantly really needy. And that need, that sense of, oh my God, the world's going to fall apart, never left her. And she would often call 911 saying she wanted to hurt herself, saying she wanted to do things to get to the hospital where she felt nurtured and protected. And we worked with her, you know, when she left a residential school and she became an adult and came to us as an adult. And she was constantly calling 911. And, you know, I had a behavior plan for her that rewarded her for not doing it. It had absolutely no effect. It was, okay, let's see, what does she really like? Well, she loves money. We'll pay her for not calling 911. Didn't work. Then the staff, well, actually the director said to me, oh no, we've got to take away the phone. We'll just take her phone away. So I did not want to do that. I do not like to use restrictives, and I refuse to use restraints. You know, I've learned these things only set up power struggles. But, you know, they kind of pushed me to do it. We took the phone away. It was a big mistake. She just looked at it as a dare. So she went over with the one-on-one to the neighbor's house, knocked on the door, said, can I use your phone? The neighbor said, sure, sweetie. Gave her the phone. She called 911. I want to kill myself. Went to the hospital and did this over and over again. Finally, I got it. Finally, I realized, look, this is a pattern that started early on, and we're there for her, but we're not there enough. So we changed the way we were doing things. And we decided to just flood her with attention, not structure everything so she has to earn it, but just say, I want you. I told her I wanted to see her 3 times a week. I wanted her to call me every day. And she began to get sick of me, really. I had her calling me at 4 o'clock every day. And if she forgot to call me, we gave her back her phone. And if she forgot to call me the next day, I'd say, why didn't you call me? What happened? And then we realized, wow, we've gone a whole month without her calling 911. So I said, let's have a party. And we had cupcakes in my office because we were a nonprofit. And, you know, we don't have a lot of money. But then she went another month and we had another party. This time we went to McDonald's. She didn't call 911, and we're flooding her with attention. We're supporting her in every way, trying to build that trust, trying to let her know, no, we're going to be there. We're going to be so in your face that you're sick of us. You know, getting the staff to talk to her 3 times a day. Just stop everything you're doing and sit down and do active listening. We trained all the staff in active listening and how to do supportive listening with folks. Changed our whole approach, listening, supporting. And then she went an entire year without calling 911. And what happened then? We got the company credit card and we went to Red Lobster where they have those great little rolls. They were so good. And then we had a big party that she didn't do it for 1 year. And you know what she did after that? I bet you guys can guess. She called 911, of course. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's the way it goes. But in any case, our approach did work. And she was finally able to actually get a job, which she kept for a good 6 months. She then lost it, but that's okay, because it was amazing that she worked it all. And then now she's, you know, very courageously job hunting and feeling lots of hope about her life and you know, coming to that new place of starting to trust and starting to trust herself as well. So I'm going to look at the chat. I'm so sorry that I'm not so good at this. So somebody says, I work with, Leona, thank you, Leona. I work with adolescents, and once rapport is established, they seek me out. The youth come from all levels of emotional development. Many later in treatment are diagnosed with developmental delays. Thank you so much. You know, that's so beautiful. It's all about rapport. That is the core issue, you know, and taking those therapeutic skills that you have and applying them just makes me so joyful, because, you know, sometimes people feel like once someone has an intellectual disability, then they're another category of person, and then we just work behaviorally. And no, we have to work with the whole person, and we have to have that holistic approach. Way to go, Leona. And I have another question about someone who, it's not a question, your daughter-in-law is 21 and grew up in a chaotic family. Oh my goodness, in and out of foster care and family homes since she was a toddler. Oh my goodness, I try my best to reassure her while maintaining boundaries. Thank goodness you're there for her. You may be the first stable adult in her life. And you know, that's what I found is, if you prove yourself to be reliable, if you prove that consistency, you do develop that trust eventually, and people do come to trust you. And then that's the catalyst for their breakthrough and their growth. Thank you so much. That was Joan. Thank you so much, Joan. That's tremendous. I'm so glad that she has you. Okay, mirror neurons. So infants need that interaction. There's a lot of research showing that when children are neglected, their brains don't even properly wire up. And that mirror neurons is a function. We're not sure we actually have neurons that reflect that, but what we do know is that there's a mirror neuron function. So when you talk to a baby, the baby's brain gets wired up for language. When you love a baby, the baby gets wired up for love. So babies that are neglected, as many of the folks that we support have been, and many of the adolescents as well, right? They come to us and they haven't even been wired for that connection. So we're doing amazing work, tremendous work that really has to do with rewiring and winning that trust. And it's so important to understand that that is what we are doing, and that's the crux and the most important part. Okay, another piece that's so critical. Oh, and thank you so much. I see I have a beautiful question. I'm going to stop and answer this question because it's so important, from Belle. I really love this process. So Belle says, is it possible to rewire an adult for love? Yes, I have had that experience, and I bet that many of you out there have also experienced that. But you got to hunker down and be ready for a tough, long road, right? You have to prove yourself over and over again, re-win that trust over and over again. But as I mentioned earlier, there's this wonderful process called neuroplasticity, in which the brain can rewire. We can rewire, we can create new neural networks to the day we die. And yeah, the trauma we've experienced deeply affects our brain. At the same time, we can also learn new things till the day we die. And our amygdala, which is firing, and often if you've had a lot of trauma saying, you're not safe, that amygdala can be calmed down when that person feels safe. So that safety is everything. If we can create an environment where somebody feels emotionally safe, they can learn to love. And I've seen it many times, and it's such a beautiful thing. And I always get concerned when we decide that somebody has no conscience, or we diagnose them with an antisocial personality disorder and decide, okay, from the get-go, this person has no ability to connect to others, when oftentimes it's an avoidant attachment disorder, or it's an identity that never developed, or they developed an identity of being the very isolated person that no one loves, and they're able to grow. They're still able to grow. They are able to learn to love. They are able to reconnect. So thank you so much for that. So let's go to that phase of adolescence and connection. That's when we're all asking, who am I? So we've figured out, okay, I'm good at school. I like school. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to learn more things. I'm going to be whatever. I want to be a teacher. Maybe I like art, so I'm going to be a great artist. I love art, but I'm a horrible artist. I'm all thumbs. But, whatever, based on our sense of strength during adolescence, we're looking at our strength saying, okay, who am I? Even if we're going through hard times, there's a glimmer of something we are, something positive that we can do more often than not. And we try to set our trajectory based on that. At that same time, very often, folks who were diagnosed by then with an intellectual disability, maybe in special education classes or getting special services, identifying themselves in that way, are looking at that and saying, who am I? They're learning who they are not. And oftentimes that's what they're hearing. Okay, they're learning what I am not. So one way that I like to explain it is, back in the day when we used to we take pictures and develop them in a dark room, you would have this picture and then you'd have the negative of the picture. So instead of having role confusion, which Erik Erikson proposes is the conflict between role development and role confusion in adolescence, we have oftentimes with folks with intellectual disabilities, that really critical developmental period when you've got to be developing that sense of self, they were learning what they were not. So it was like that picture in the dark room that was the negative. You're not going to get a good job. They're trying to get a summer job. Sorry, you're not getting it. You're not going to college. Your brothers and sisters are going to college, but not you. You're not the person who gets married. That's not who you're going to be. When you're not going to have kids. Isn't that horrible? Who wants to be told that? I actually work with somebody who in his adolescent period, he was told, you will never marry and have children. So he developed an imaginary wife and kids. And I thought that was a really creative, wonderful way to solve the problem in his mind, because he would bring them to class and have them sit in the back. But horribly, what happened to him was the teacher said, well, he was so involved in such an intellectual disability that he shouldn't be in the school where he was. He was in a special ed class, but in an integrated school. And this was years ago. And so she got him removed and put in a special school because of that. And that was the one trauma that he had difficulty his entire life overcoming, when really he was solving a problem. I can't have a wife and kids. Well, then I'll have an imaginary wife and kids, because he was yearning for that identity. He only wanted to be a husband and father. And he told me that in therapy. That was all I wanted. I just wanted to be a dad, and I wanted to be like my dad. They're not the person who drives. Everybody's getting a car, or not getting a car, but learning to drive. The rich ones are getting cars, right? Or the rest of us are getting broken down cars if we scrape our money together. But no, you don't. I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to learn to drive. You're not getting that license. How devastating is that when you're a teenager, right? Oftentimes not being on the high school team, not going to the prom, not being the one who's liked, not being popular, not being cool. So I think it's really important for us, no matter how old someone is, to help them develop that positive sense of self, to help them to go back and rebuild. And a lot of that rebuilding is based on how they see themselves. And that's what we can help with on so many levels. And that's also a soft skill that we can teach staff, is how to help people develop and get that sense of self, get that sense of, I am somebody. This is what I do well. These are my friends. This is what I like. This is how I make a difference. This is what I'm proud of. Really helping people to rebuild and form a sense of self. And I would love to tell you that I just came up with that myself and I really understand everything. But man, no, I learned what I've learned from staff. There are certain staff in my life. I've always worked inside of agencies, except for a short period. As like the clinical director, had different roles in different various nonprofits serving folks, and of adolescents and adults, mainly adults, but sometimes adolescents. And I would look at the staff who were just amazing. I always call them the magic staff, right? The people who you could give anybody to, and that person would calm down. That person would just start to be happy and chill out, even if they were breaking everything in sight or beating everyone up. Once they were with that magic staff person, they were just so happy. And I would be like, what are they doing? First thing I realized is those staff were definitely not following the behavior plans that I wrote. That was the first thing I could see right off the bat. Well, they're not following my plans, but what are they doing? And I was like, okay, I've got to figure it out. And I always remember this one staff, his name was Herman, and he was so cool. He was probably one of the coolest people I've ever known. He looked just like Barry White. If you guys know, maybe the older people, you remember Barry White. I guess we all know Barry White, right? He was a really good singer, very, very cool. He talked like Barry White. He'd be like, hey, what's going on? And you would give him anybody, and that person would just start to calm down and become so happy. And it was amazing what he could do. And I remember we had this one guy, I'll call him Stephen. And Stephen, we had an evaluation period, and Stephen came to us after having, having been in jail. He was in a juvenile facility. Then he aged out. Then he was out for a while. Then he got an assault charge. He was in jail. Then he was found not competent to stand trial. And then he came to us with forensic involvement. We had a 2-week evaluation period, and I was saying to everybody, I don't know, I don't think we can do this. He's very involved. I was the paper person. Look at the paper, reading the evaluations, look at the psychological. I don't think so. But we took him anyway, because no one ever listened to me, which was probably a good thing in retrospect. And the 3rd week after we had accepted him, I'll never forget it. He was just hauling on someone, just beating this guy to a pulp, boom, 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 boom. And I'm coming up and I'm saying, stop it. And I'm not going to scream because it'll hurt your computer or wake you up. It's terrible when I start screaming, but that's what I used to do a lot, because I'm that type of person. You know, I get hysterical very easily, and it's the worst type of person to be when you're working with folks who really need somebody calming and who have amygdalas that fire easily. You really need to be a soft-spoken, loving, kind person. And I have the love in me somewhere, but the voice doesn't do it very well. So I learned after years, but back then I would just say, stop, 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 stop. And Herman was the exact opposite. So while Stephen's beating this little guy, Joe, up, Herman comes up and he's like, hey, what's going on? What's happening? And, you know, Stephen was getting worse as I was kind of shouting, don't do that. You know, this is the worst thing I could have done. But he stopped when Herman came. And Herman said the most important words I have ever heard. He said to him, hey, man, this isn't you. This isn't who you are. And of course, I messed it up totally because I said, oh my God, this is him. Did you see his file? I was telling you guys, this is what he does. This is totally him. And Herman was like, okay, you know, we got this, Karen. We're good. We're good. Someone get the psychologist, please. They're always trying to get rid of me. I used to think, oh, they're so nice. They'd be like, we're fine. We got this. And then I later realized they were trying to get rid of me because I would make it worse. So then I just stepped back and I said, you know, I need to figure out what Herman does, because Herman's got it down. What Herman does is so effective and people really respond to him. So what Herman was talking to him about was his character, who he was, not his behavior, not what should you be doing right now? What did you just do wrong? Oh, you're going to lose your soda if you hit him. Or, oh, now you know you're not going to go on that trip with us. No, none of that. But he was saying, no, this isn't you, man. And he said, you're a man. And then he pointed out to him the really cool thing he had done that last week when he had talked things out with this other guy. He said, you talked it out with George. You guys worked it out. You're a man. This isn't you. And sure enough, Stephen just straightened right up. And he said, oh my God, I know, you're right. But Joe said something about my mother. And it turns out that Stephen's mom had walked out on him when he was 4 years old, had walked out on the whole family, left him and his brother with a very abusive dad. And his life had been really, really tough ever since. And Joe's idea of a joke was to say, oh, your mother, you know, whatever. Joe was like, you know, the comedian of the program. And it just didn't go over that well. But what Herman did, you know, he would say, come here, buddy, walk with me. Come on, man. He would get him away from the trigger. He would get whoever it was going through something away from the trigger, calm them down, help them feel safe first and foremost. Say, you talk to me, you got me, we're good. And then tell them about who they were in a really positive way. Like, you are a man. You're a good man. This isn't you. Stephen, within weeks, was joining the group, doing all kinds of activities. And then 6 months later, had a part-time job. Amazing stuff that Herman got him to do, because Herman would hold a mirror up of his best self. And, you know, to me, I just learned so much. It was always so amazing to me to see just the effectiveness of showing someone their best self. How about you? Can you remember that, you know, someone in your adolescence who really believed in you or let you know a strength and or even your own experience of finding something out? And now can you think of somebody with a disability and what they went through at that time? You know, how was it that we started talking to them about their behavior and then they became their behavior? To me, that's just kind of a heartbreaking phenomenon when we start identifying people by their behavior and they identify themselves by their behavior. Well, I'm someone who bites, or you know, how many people do you know? How many of your friends, when you say, how are you? Do they say, I've been good today, but I was bad on Tuesday? They don't say that, right? Well, one time my friends and I, we all went on a diet. So we would say, well, I've been good today, but that's really not the same. No, but how many of you know somebody with an intellectual disability who says, when you ask them how you are, they say, I've been good today. And they tell you what they were, what their behavior was versus how they feel. In fact, oftentimes folks don't even have the words for how they feel. because they don't have that internal center of control. They don't have an internal locus of control. Everything is based on our view of them in many cases because we've identified them as such. And to me, that's we've inadvertently done that in a way that's actually really damaged their sense of self and their identity. And I did it too. In fact, I wrote plans that just listed what they did wrong, and then here's what you're supposed to do. And we have data sheets about what you're doing wrong and talking to them about it. And that became, in their mind, who they were. And I feel very bad about that. Like, wow, you know, what could I have done differently? I'm doing a lot differently now. But it took me a long time to learn, being an old dog. And when people identify themselves as having that intellectual disability, that's so devastating as well. Like, well, I'm not as smart as everybody else. So Howard Gardner has a model of multiple intelligence. So you see that here, right? All the aspects of intelligence. He says there's kinesthetic, there's, you know, body intelligence, there's musical intelligence, there's, you know, there's ability to connect socially with people. There's ability to understand. There's so many different types of intelligence. And one term that I really hate is the term savant. Just, oh, well, that person's a savant. That's ridiculous. We're all savants in our own way. And we measure such a very thin type of intelligence, such a very small piece is what we decide is IQ. I don't know if any of you saw this season's America's Got Talent. And if you saw Cody, I love showing that video of his audition. I show it everywhere I go so we can all just cry because he's someone that has brilliance. He's musically brilliant. He's amazing. He's more brilliant than 90% of the professional musicians we know. And yet he has autism and he's blind as well. I think we have to look at the fact that intelligence is relative and there's many aspects of intelligence. And I'll tell you, IQ has nothing to do with intelligence. And some of the folks most of the people that I've worked with have been so smart in so many ways. I've learned so much from them. And I think we need to redefine it. And part of identity shouldn't be, well, this is how you did on your IQ test. It should be, wow, this is your insight. These are your strengths. This is how you see things. This is fantastic. How does our definition of intelligence limit people? Can you all think of someone you know who's really smart, but they have an IQ under 70? I bet you can. I love this. Tess says, I focus on people's strengths as opposed to focusing on their limitations. Thank you, Tess. However, it can be challenging as the waiver program is a deficit-based system. Isn't that the truth? I had a mom of a daughter with autism say to me, she said, you know, while I want to build my daughter up, at the same time, I've been in school between 0 and 21. I had to be fighting for her, telling everyone what her deficits were just to get services. And then after 21, I had to say, okay, this is her deficit to get her more services. But then I had to fight to say, well, if she isn't all her deficit, she should be able to work, right? So the fight never ends. And it's not a strength-based fight. Our system isn't based on strengths. Thank you for sharing that. Belle says, when I do my annual MAP 351 assessments, I'm often surprised to remember the IQ numbers of most of my clients because who they are doesn't reflect those numbers. That is so true. Thank you so much. And let me see if I can keep up. Several of the youth I work with have lower IQs. This is Deborah. Have lower IQs, but immense artistic talent or mechanical talents. Oh my gosh, that is so true. I want to really plug this movie by Dan Habib called Intelligent Lives, and he is brilliant, and it really just shows the just brilliance of so many folks with the diagnosis of an intellectual disability. Yes, thank you so much, and so many great comments. Unfortunately, I'm going to, thank you, I have to read this one by Holly. I'm sorry for the people who I'm not able to read. So all of them are brilliant in their own way. Thank you so much, Holly. Yes, yes, yes. Emotional IQ, creativity, artistry. Yes, the people we serve have a disability. They are not stupid. Thank you, Holly, my kindred spirit. Yes, I think we all agree, right? I think once you know people, you know this is true, and yet our system defines them totally by this arbitrary way based on one deficit. Okay. So obstacles to positive identity development. Again, identifying people by their behaviors, which becomes their identity, and then talking about them as attention seeking. To me, that's so demeaning and dehumanizing. I have many stories about that, where someone who's got so much pain, so much trauma, and is showing with their actions what their trauma is, and oh no, that's just for attention, and you have to not give them attention. And no, actually, they're trying to communicate. How can we help people to communicate with words and not have to use their behavior? And then how can we prevent behaviors from being categorized as attention seeking? How do we support inactivity? Oh, they don't want to work, they don't want to go here. No. Half the time they don't even know what it is because they haven't had the experiences. We need to broaden our ability to introduce people to all kinds of experiences, right? We need to identify and encourage that validation of existence. You are somebody, you exist, that counterpoint, right? I exist, I count, I have worth, I am someone, and I have a purpose. That sense of mission is so critical. I really believe so strongly that that's another big piece that's missing. People need a purpose-driven life. And there's a lot of spiritual writing about a purpose-driven life. It's in Christianity, it's in Buddhism. I practice Buddhism. We talk about this all the time. But no, it is not, oh, people should have a purpose except for people with intellectual disabilities. No, people with intellectual disabilities shouldn't just be the passive recipients of our help, people we serve. No. They're people we support in flourishing and finding their own mission and how they can make a difference. And I know there's many wonderful success stories where people have had that mission, have discovered that. And that's where someone really is able to develop that identity and that sense of self. How many of you know someone who had all kinds of behavioral issues but got a job? And once they got that job, all those issues cleared up. Not because we rewarded them with something, not because of some contingency plan we had, but because they felt like they were needed somewhere. They had a sense of purpose and a sense of belonging, right? I am someone and I can make a difference. So critical. So engagement. A psychologist named Sean Ginwright has been writing a lot about the healing powers of just engaging. And I'm so concerned when I see so many people not engaged. People where we say, okay, you're not going to be in the workshop, which I understand. We don't want to segregate people, but we're going to find a job for you. But then what happens is many people are sitting home doing nothing and actually re-experiencing their trauma, not engaged in their life. So how can we find ways to engage people while we shoot for these wonderful goals? That's so critical in their sense of self and identity and their ability to develop that positive sense of self and true engagement, right? Oh, I'm just going to say what, is it Michael or Mikal said, replace attention seeking with connection seeking. Thank you so much. I love that. I would like to steal that if that's okay. I love that. Instead of attention seeking, connection seeking. That's exactly what it is. And see what happens to one's perception of that person. Yeah, and so many of you are saying, yes, I hate that label, attention seeking. We have like all these responses about that. Thank you. We should outlaw it just like we outlawed the R word, right? I think it's just as devastating. People need real relationships. They need real friendships. They need significant others. They need the opportunity to have relationships, not just paid relationships. And agency, right? Agency is the ability to act on your environment, to be able to move it forward, to be able to know that you have some control over your life. We have a lot of beautiful plans. Sometimes they have really nice pictures, but many of them aren't really real. They're really good. They look great in the file. Licensing people love them. Oh, what a nice plan. That's great IP. But the individuals know they're not real. The folks that we're supporting are like, yeah, good job at my meeting. I know I won't get that job, but thanks for putting it down. So how can we really help people to have that sense that, yeah, you can move your own life forward? Creativity, I think that's so important. As many of you were saying, you have folks that you support that are creative, that do, and Kay Hines is saying, I always encourage staff to engage in activities that they like to do. We aren't sure what they have been exposed to. Thank you. We don't even know what talents people have. That's why I love showing the video of Cody, because his mom saw that he had musical talent, but she took that all the way. And she talks about, I heard her in an interview saying it was so hard to find someone that was willing to teach her son, who really wasn't very verbal, who didn't use words, and really struggled to communicate, to find teachers who would see his musical ability beyond just his ability to communicate. Thank you so much. This is beautiful. So Daisaku, there's a horrible picture. I don't know how, I'm sorry about my slide, but he's a beautiful Buddhist philosopher. And here he is with Nelson Mandela, who has an amazing sense of self. Well, he had one. And he was in prison for 27 years, but it didn't destroy him. He came out because he had a sense of who he was and a sense of purpose. He came out of prison. He not only changed South Africa, he changed the world. Daisaku Ikeda says, ultimately, happiness rests on how you establish a solid sense of self or being, you know, and happiness should be our goal, not getting rid of behaviors, not making people comply. That's another word I'd love to outlaw non-compliance. Let's put that on the list, right? Non-compliance. No. Who's compliant? Who wants to be compliant? We want to be somebody and we want to be happy. And happiness really stems from that identity, that sense of self. How do we foster it? Through positive regard. So this experiment was done where Bob Rosenthal told graduate students, you have smart mice, you have to run them through a maze, and told another group of graduate students, you have dumb mice. There's no IQ test for mice. But the students who thought they had smart mice, those mice end up running 3 times, well, we call them rats. I worked with them. I like to call them mice when I think about working with them, because rats, I think about living in Baltimore, is really large and kind of scary, but they were rats, even though they look like mice. But in any case, they ran through the maze twice as fast when the students thought they were the smart ones. That experiment was done by Carol Dweck with people. She took kids who, this probably wouldn't pass an IRB today, but it was a very important piece of research, because she took kids that all had the same scores on tests and grades. She divided them in half, and she told teachers, this half of the kids are brilliant. They're gifted, they're talented, they're amazing. You work with them. Then she told another set of teachers, you have the kids that have learning problems. They have disabilities and they're going to really struggle. And sure enough, the kids where the teachers thought that they were gifted and talented, those kids within a matter of months went ahead at least 1 grade level, some 2. All of them did great. And the kids where the teachers thought that they had problems either stayed the same, some even lost skills. That is the power of our regard. When we say to somebody like Herman did, you are something, you are amazing, that person will flourish. And that's what the magic staff that I've known, the people you can give anybody to and they get better, they respect. They hold that mirror up and say, you are somebody, you are amazing. This is all the great things. These are all the great things about you. They help build that sense of self, right? And that's so critical. And if we can redirect ourselves to do that kind of work, I think things will just really take off. And if you reflect upon that, you know, maybe you've had a boss who didn't think you were all that great. I know I had a boss who used to say to me, you have a PhD, and I turned into a babbling fool around him. I would say the dumbest things. I had a boss who told me I was so smart. I would turn into a genius around her. It's amazing how somebody's regard of you really affects you. It's profound. And those are the soft skills we can teach people. So here's Rafaela, pretty name, probably said it wrong. She says, but what do you do if you want to encourage someone's talent or interest and the entire team agrees, but the family members who are substitute decision makers don't agree, don't see the benefit, only the possible risk? Well, that is a situation we have all been in. Safety versus risk, and the fear and the trauma of the family. I do a lot of training about trauma and trauma-informed care and trauma-informed supports. And one thing I've been talking a lot lately about is the support families need and the trauma of the family. Because oftentimes the family trauma is what shuts them down and makes them shut that individual down. One thing I started doing is just meeting with families without the person there and trying to encourage them, trying to work with them, trying to help them to get past their fears and their trauma, or maybe getting them into family therapy. I wish I had the magic answer, but that's the one thing I've done that has helped somewhat. Great question. It's something we've all struggled with because, of course, that family's so afraid what's going to happen. Oh, what if they get made fun of? Or what if it all is a failure and then they go backwards? It's tough. Thank you for trying. Okay. I have this wonderful saying. I know I don't have much time, but I'm so excited to share this from John McKnight. And I learned it from Norm Kunk. And I always say his name wrong, but he and his wife run a wonderful webinar series and teaching tools called Conversations That Matter. And there's an interview of him on YouTube that is just brilliant, where he says, you know, we have to redefine the problem. The problem isn't people with intellectual disabilities. The problem isn't their behavior. The problem isn't them. It's that we're not, you guys are getting it, but you know, the system is not strength-based. The system is not supporting people in their growth. We're doing this controlling thing that's actually in many cases making it worse. But he says, John McKnight said, revolutions begin when people who are defined as the problem achieve the power to redefine the problem. That's why enabling people to have their voice is so critical. It's so important. And you know, that's where I have to thank all of you, because obviously that's what you're doing in the work you do, even seeing this as the critical issue. I know you're doing it every day, and redefining the problem by giving the power back to that person. Here's your life. Let me help you to have agency, to have the ability to move your life forward. That's so critical. They need to see themselves as somebody effective, somebody who is somebody. What matters most is how you see yourself. Right? And here's where I can say, actually, maybe I should go back. This is what's coming next. So I'm going to go back to here to have my picture of the lion, and then we'll go on. But just take 1 minute for one more question if there's any questions. Yes, Credo for Support, the same guy, Norm Kuntz. Am I saying his name right? He is amazing. Yes, he's an amazing teacher and advocate. Thank you, Becky. And I recommend all of his materials. Thank you so much. And I'm happy to share anything that I have. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Patty to talk about what's coming next. Thank you so much for your attention and your time today and your wonderful comments, which were very inspiring, and your questions and just this wonderful interaction. Thank you so much.
And Karyn, we've had several people ask what the website was that had the resources. Would you post that in the chat?
I will. I'll do it right now. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you for your time and attention during this hour. Before our next webinar will be held November the 15th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern with presenter Lydia X.Z. Brown. Lydia will give a presentation titled Strategies for Supporting People at the Intersection of Disabled and Trans Identities. And the registration link is available on our website, mhddcenter.org. And Karyn, can you advance the slides a bit?
Oh, sorry. I thought I had. Oops. Here we go. Oh, of course, now because I switched over, I can't advance. Oh, there we go. So I switched over to chat. Sorry, everybody.
And this webinar was recorded. We will have the recording as well as the transcript available on the mhddcenter.org website. And now we'll open up the floor for any additional questions. And please be on the lookout for post-webinar assessments coming to you via email.
Oh. You are wonderful. Thank you.